G'day DIY Pool Legends. Well, today we're going to be talking about plumbing up a heat pump, filter and a chlorinator, as well as the main filtration pump for your pool. So you've probably got all of these boxes and it's all exciting. It's like Christmas, but then you're looking at all these manuals and you're wondering what goes where and how on earth do you connect it all together. And that's completely fair enough, because how often do you plumb up pool equipment in your lifetime? Most people, it's the first and only time. So this video is going to step you through how to set up your equipment and what's going where it is a heat pump that is set up on a separate circuit, meaning it has its own pump to draw water out of the pool and push the water back into the pool in conjunction with a saltwater chlorinator and standard filtration. But the starting point is, where does it go? Well, you need to have something solid underneath your equipment, whether it's paving slabs or concrete. And in terms of space, what do you need? Generally, if you're setting up with a heat pump, you need 2.7 meters wide by 1 meter deep. Without a heat pump and you're using a sand filter, you need 2 meters wide by 1 meter deep. So let's look at the heat pump. This is your inlet and your outlet lines for your heat pump. They have barrel unions and they just simply screw on. They're hand tight. You don't need to glue them together. So what the installer is doing here is he's laid out all of his equipment where he wants it to be once everything is plumbed up, and that gives you the ability to adjust as you go. So what the installer is doing now is plumbing up the line that is running from the separate pump for the heating system, and it's going to push water into your heat pump. That top one that you can see with the little bit of pipe that's being glued into it before the join goes onto it is the outlet line, which is this. So this is effectively what the hot water or the heated water is going to be going back into the pool line via. You can see the joins, and then you can also see as it runs along, you've got a right angle elbow, another right angle elbow into the outlet fitting on the heat pump. Now, it's labeled really clearly on all heat pumps what is the inlet line and what is the outlet line. And what's missing there is actually the water supply going into that small separate pump for the heater, which we'll come back to in a moment. This is the inside of a sand filter. What you're looking at down the bottom there is called laterals, and that is where the water gets drawn through and then pushed up through that pipe. Now, that pipe you do not want to fill up with sand or glass media, so you'll get one of these little clear caps in the box. Put that over the top. This actually stops this glass media from going down the pipe. Now, if you are using glass media instead of sand, you'll have two types. We'll have one with coarse written on the bag and the other one with fine written on the bag. The coarse goes at the bottom and goes in first, so that stops that fine glass media, clogging up your laterals and causing you problems. So you should be supplied with the exact amount that you need. In this instance, this filter takes 120 kilos of glass media or sand. If you're not sure on the difference between glass media or sand, download our e-guide around pool equipment. We talk about it there. It is dusty. Put on a mask because you just don't want to be breathing in basically fine silica dust at the end of the day. So this is what it will look like. This is glass, as we've touched on, but if it's sand, it will look the same. Now, when you go and grab the multi-port valve, which is what goes on top of the media filter, this is the underside of it. Put a bit of lubrication, silicone lubricant around that green O-ring, and then it simply seats onto that pipe that you can see sticking up in the middle. Now, if it's not seating properly, you may need to trim the top of that pipe slightly so that valve seats properly, and then you can get that locking collar to go around it. And that's what holds the multi-port valve in. Now, it's called a multi-port valve because it has multiple ports and it controls for backwashing, rinsing, and everything else. So what the installer is doing here is now starting to set up with the salt cell. So what he's holding in his hand is the salt cell. That is what actually produces the chlorine, and it goes after the filter. It's always after the filter. So you have your main pool pump, as you can see there. We'll then go into the filter, which we'll do in a moment. But when it comes out of the filter, it goes into the salt cell. The water then receives the additional chlorine from the salt cell and then the other side of the cell is the return line back into the pool. Now the connections on the multi-port valve into the salt cell are barrel unions again, so they are hand tightened, and the other side of the connection is glued in with a 2-part pressure glue. Now this whole system is all 40mm pipe. It's class 9 PVC pipe per the Australian standards. Some people will run 50mm. At the end of the day, it depends on your system and your personal preference. If you're looking at the multi-port valve and you're wondering, well, what is that other opening? That is the inlet side. So when it comes from the pump into the filter, it then gets filtered through that sand, and then it's going to come out and go through the salt cell. Now with this pool, then it has a water feature, and the water feature needs its own water supply, and that's going to run off the main pool pump. So to control whether that water feature is getting water or not, the installer is fitting what's called a 3-way valve. Now that's a Jandy Neverluve 3-way valve. They're excellent, they're the best on the market. We don't suggest using anything else. Beware where it says generic if you're hunting around on eBay. Basically, if you see them on eBay, make sure they're the real thing. If they're really cheap, they're not, and you're going to have problems. So in terms of adjusting this, it's really straightforward. You just adjust the barrel union to get the salt cell and the pipe work nice and level. And so in this instance here, what needs to be fitted next is the return line going back to the water feature, and then the return line going back into the pool, which is going to come out of the 2 return jets in the shallow end of the pool, which is pushing out your nice filtered chlorinated water. Now you might be noticing how clean all this pipe work looks. There's no red or blue 2-part pressure glue runs everywhere, and that's because the installer is using clear 2-part glue. For anything that's in the ground, you can see red and green on the pipework is in the background there. Anything in the ground, don't worry about it, you're not going to see it. But where you're going to see it, it's just so much nicer when you don't see those runs coming up and down and all over pipework. Installer's fitting the last 90-degree elbow on the return line back to the water feature, and this is what it should look like at this point. Now, that main pool pump isn't fixed to anything. It can be moved and adjusted. So if you're looking at the multi-port valve now, what the installer is doing is fitting the inlet line into the pool filter itself. If you're wondering what that other opening is on the right hand side of the multi-port valve, that is the discharge line for when you're backwashing or rinsing the media filter, or you're simply wanting to discharge water. That's a separate connection, which we won't cover in this video. But again, it gets fitted in exactly the same way as the rest of your pipework. Now we love a good old she'll be right and let's wing it approach as much as anyone. But once you start getting to the point now of setting up on your main filtration pump, pay attention to the manuals. There's quite specific information about the distances of pipework into the pump before you have right angled elbows, and also coming out of it. That's to maintain your water pressure in your pool. If you don't get that quite right, then you may have some problems that you don't really want to be dealing with. And the old carpenter's maxim of measure twice, cut once is never been more important than in this situation. So dry fit all of your fittings, make sure it all lines up before getting the glue going. So now you've got everything connected, it's time to connect the cable that runs from the chlorinator into the salt cell. Now the salt cell is what actually produces the chlorine that then goes back into your pool, and it is super easy. You just slide that fitting over the thread, use the butterfly nut to finger tight. The 2 pins go into the opening on the back of the cell. You don't need to be an electrician to do this, you don't need an electrician to do this, and they're pretty much standard. This is an Astral system. They all look the same, give or take. Make sure that you're using genuine parts, and you can see just how easy this is. So for down the track, if you need to replace the salt cell, usually after about 4 or 5 years, you can see how easy it is to do it. Grab the end cap, put it over, gives it a nice, neat, tidy finish. So that way the fittings are protected and you're done. Now, if that was me, I'd straighten it up so it's a nice, perfect cable going down. But I'm one of those crazy people that can't abide by things not being in the right place. The last part you're going to do with the filter is fit the pressure gauge. Use a bit of thread tape. Now what this pressure gauge does is tells you when the pressure is increasing inside the filter and you need it clean. A lot of people ask, well, at what pressure do I need to backwash my filter? And depending on your setup, depending on how many elbows and distance from the pool and everything else, everyone's starting pressure is different. So what you're going to do is when you first run your filter and it's clean, look at the pressure on that gauge in terms of kPa, and when it's 20 kPa above that after it's been running, that's when you need to backwash your filter, basically give it a clean out. It's as easy as that, nothing more scientific. This is what your setup should look like when it's all said and done. See, the installer fairy has visited and has connected the inlet lines into the main pool pump and also the heat pump water pump. When you weren't looking, unfortunately those fairies don't exist. You're going to have to do that yourself. So that's how you set up your filtration equipment when you're using a media filter. If you like what you see, please like and subscribe to our channel. Tell your mates about us. It really helps us out and spreads the word to other DIY pool legends like yourself. And if you've got any suggestions, as always, on topics that we can create videos that's going to make life easier for you, please let us know. All right, DIY pool legends, thanks for watching and we'll talk to you next time.